Laws are a fundamental aspect of civilization. They're meant to keep people safe and protect our property. However, there are many notable instances throughout history where laws just don't make sense. In this episode, we're counting down 10 things that used to be illegal. I know there's plenty of other examples of ridiculous laws out there, so please share your favorites in the comments. Number 10. Rock and roll. In the 1950s, rock and roll music sparked a cultural revolution, but not everyone was a fan. Some authorities and conservative groups in the United States saw it as a dangerous influence on young people. The music's rebellious rhythm, sexually charged lyrics, and energetic performances were a direct challenge to the status quo. Parents feared it would lead to delinquency, promiscuity, and disobedience. In fact, some cities and radio stations went so far as to ban rock and roll, worried that it would corrupt the youth and destabilize traditional values. But despite the resistance, rock and roll only grew stronger. Legends like Elvis Presley and Chuck Berry became symbols of a generation eager for change. By the end of the 1950s, rock and roll had broken free from its critics, reshaping not just music but society itself. What was once feared became the soundtrack to a revolution. Number 9. Caffeinated drinks. In the 18th century, Prussia's King Frederick the Great issued a surprising decree. He tried to ban coffee. At the time, coffee had become a popular drink across Europe, but Frederick had his reasons. He believed beer was the true national drink of Prussia, and he feared that coffee, being a foreign import, would undermine beer consumption and hurt local brewing industries. But there was more. He also saw coffee as a challenge to his authority. He thought it would replace beer as a social drink and even rival the traditional beer halls where important decisions were made. In response, Frederick imposed a tax on coffee beans and even tried to encourage people to drink beer instead, calling for the destruction of coffee houses. The plan backfired, though. People found ways to continue drinking coffee, and eventually, the ban was lifted. But it's a fascinating glimpse into how something as simple as a cup of coffee once sparked a royal struggle over national identity and control. Number 8. Reading in bed. In 18th century England, reading in bed was actually illegal. It may sound strange today, but back then authorities believed it was bad for your health and even your morals. Doctors at the time argued that reading in bed could cause eye strain, headaches, and bad posture. But it wasn't just about health. There was also a cultural belief that reading late into the night could lead to sinful behavior or immoral thoughts, especially if people were reading literature considered too risque or subversive. To make matters worse, books were expensive, and the government worried that the spread of literature could challenge the established social order. So, in an effort to control the population's reading habits, some local laws restricted reading in bed, especially after certain hours. Over time, these restrictions faded, and reading in bed became a normal part of life. But this quirky law remains a reminder of how strict control over even the simplest activities was once seen as a way to maintain order. Number 7. Eating tomatoes. In the 16th century, eating tomatoes in Europe was considered dangerous, so much so that they were often avoided or even deemed illegal. Why? It all started with fear and superstition. Tomatoes, native to the Americas, were introduced to Europe by explorers, but people believed that they were poisonous. The plant's relation to the nightshade family, which contains toxic species, led many to think tomatoes were unsafe to eat. In fact, wealthy Europeans who tried tomatoes often fell ill. But it wasn't the tomato itself. The problem was their lead-lined plates. When tomatoes were served on these plates, the acidity of the fruit would react with the lead, causing poisoning. This misconception led to the belief that tomatoes were lethal. It wasn't until the 18th century that tomatoes began to be embraced in cooking. Slowly, people discovered that they were not only safe to eat, but delicious too. And so, the tomato went from feared fruit to kitchen staple, a perfect example of how a little knowledge and time can change history. Number 6. Public dancing. In the 2010s, public dancing in Russia became a surprising legal battleground. In 2013, a controversial law was passed that effectively banned public dancing in certain public spaces without government permission. The law was part of a broader crackdown on what the government viewed as, quote, immoral behavior, often linked with the LGBT+ community and Western cultural influences. Authorities feared that public dances could lead to gatherings that promoted freedom of expression and individual rights, ideas that went against the strict social values promoted by the state. The law led to numerous protests, with critics arguing that it was a way to suppress freedom of assembly and artistic expression. In some places, authorities even shut down dance parties in public parks or clubs. Despite the crackdown, underground dance movements persisted, and eventually, in 2016, the law was softened and many public dance restrictions were lifted. Still, the story of Russia's public dance ban is a reminder of how cultural expression can sometimes clash with political agendas. Number 5. Wearing a bowler hat in public. In 19th century England, wearing a bowler hat in public was surprisingly illegal, at least for the common folk. The iconic round hat, popularized by the upper class, was seen as a symbol of wealth and status. In fact, the bowler hat was first created in 1849 by hat makers Thomas and William Bowler, specifically for the elite, designed to protect them from falling branches while riding horses. However, its adoption by the working class caused a stir. The ruling class saw the bowler as a challenge to the established social order, a symbol of rebellion. Local laws were enacted in certain areas, prohibiting the lower classes from wearing the hat, fearing it would disrupt the social hierarchy. It was a matter of class control. Fashion was a statement, and the bowler hat on the wrong person sent the wrong message. Over time, the bowler hat became more widely accepted, shredding its elitist connotations. By the end of the century, it was no longer illegal to wear one, but the bizarre law serves as a quirky reminder of how even fashion can be tied to social control. Number 4. Wearing yellow. In 18th century France, wearing yellow was illegal, at least for most people. The reason? It was a color reserved for royalty. Yellow had long been associated with the French monarchy, symbolizing wealth, power, and divine right. The royal family, especially King Louis XIV, used yellow to convey their supreme status. For the common folk, wearing this color was considered a direct challenge to the established social order. In fact, the French monarchy passed laws that strictly regulated who could wear the color yellow. It was forbidden for anyone but the elite, and violating this law was seen as an act of defiance or even rebellion. As the French Revolution gained momentum in the late 18th century, the association of yellow with the monarchy became even more significant. After the fall of the royal family, yellow eventually lost its elitist ties and became available to all. But for a time, wearing yellow in France was a symbol of resistance, or perhaps a little too much ambition. Number 3. Saying bless you after someone sneezes. In 16th century France, saying bless you after someone sneezes was actually illegal. The origin of this law stems from medieval beliefs that sneezing could release evil spirits or a person's soul. But in France, it wasn't the superstition that led to the ban. It was the church's authority. At the time, the church was incredibly powerful, and anything that challenged its control over religious rituals or practices was seen as a threat. The phrase bless you was linked to private religious rituals, and the church viewed it as an inappropriate, informal act of blessing. Saying bless you was thought to undermine the clergy's role in providing spiritual protection. As a result, French authorities imposed laws that prohibited this practice, arguing that only the clergy should have the right to bless others. Though the law was short-lived, the phrase itself survived. Today, bless you is an ingrained part of many cultures and languages, but it's a fascinating example of how religious and social norms can shape even the smallest of daily interactions. Number 2. Playing video games. In the early 2000s, video games were effectively banned in China. The government's concern wasn't about the content of the games, it was about the potential harm they could cause to the country's youth. Authorities feared that video games, especially imported ones, would lead to addiction, disrupt education, and promote violent or immoral behavior. The government also worried about the influence of Western culture, which many believed was embedded in the games. In 2000, China imposed a ban on the sale of gaming consoles, preventing them from being sold in the country for over a decade. They argued that children spending hours playing games would harm their health and development. But the ban didn't stop the rise of online gaming, which became a massive industry in the country. Over time, the government eased restrictions and eventually allowed gaming consoles back on the market in 2014. Today, China is home to one of the largest video game markets in the world. The early ban, however, remains a reminder of the clash between entertainment, regulation, and cultural control in modern China. Number 1. Owning a pet alligator. In Florida, owning a pet alligator was once illegal, but not because of their cute, scaly charm. Alligators, native to the state, were considered dangerous, and by the 1970s, the growing popularity of exotic pets led to the rise of alligator ownership. The problem? Alligators can grow up to 15 feet long and are unpredictable, posing serious risks to public safety. In 1943, Florida passed laws prohibiting the private ownership of alligators to protect both people and the animals. The state's wildlife regulations focused on ensuring the alligators remained in the wild, where they belong, rather than in backyards where they could become a danger or suffer from improper care. Over time, the law was strictly enforced, with fines and penalties for those who attempted to keep these powerful reptiles as pets. Today, while it's now legal to own an alligator with a special permit, these laws have helped preserve the species and reduce dangerous encounters, keeping both humans and alligators safe. And those are 10 insane things that used to be illegal. We could probably make 10 more videos about all the other strange examples of things that could have been on this list. So please, make sure to tell us about your favorites in the comments. And if you like this video, please do us a favor and like, subscribe, and check out these other videos we think you might like on your screen now.